Welcome back to Podforce One. I'm Miranda Devine, and today we are with Vice President JD Vance in his home in Washington at the Naval Observatory. Thank you, Vice President Vance, for joining Podforce One.
Of course. Thanks for being here.
And especially thank you for inviting us into your home at the Naval Observatory, which I'm very interested in my first time here because, of course, when Joe Biden was vice president during the period in Hunter Biden's laptop, he had a lot of meetings for Hunter Biden's business partners in this building. Did you know about that?
No, I had no idea that it had such an illustrious history. We have done no grifting thus far in the vice president's residence. So we're only in here for 9 months so far. So maybe I'll take some ideas from Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's business dealings. But no, I mean, for us, we love this place, right? I joke that it's the world's nicest public housing, but it really is for us. It's a family home because we have, you just met our dog a few minutes ago. We have 3 little kids, an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And so we try to make this, their place. We still have our place in Cincinnati, but we don't, if we're lucky, we'll be there one weekend a month. So we really tried to sort of make this a family home. And I mean, like, for example, this morning, my 5-year-old brought me a pumpkin because they've been growing a pumpkin outside.
Oh, lovely.
And they've gotten, in their big pumpkin patch, they've gotten 1 usable pumpkin. So he was very excited about this. So we picked it in the last couple of days. So we're going to roast it, try to make pumpkin pie. But it's a beautiful place, and it's really an amazing place
and the kids
to raise a family. They do. I mean, the president jokes with me that it's actually nicer than his house because it's so private.
Yes.
Right. I mean, the White House is the White House, and it's very beautiful. But if you think about it, we're on 40 acres or so of very private property. You don't quite live in the same fishbowl, which of course for kids is like the best thing possible because there are a lot of sacrifices for the kids. And there are a lot of ways in which their life is different, but their home is still very much their home. And I feel like they can be kids here, which is what you want.
And they go to a local school?
Well, so our 3-year-old goes to preschool, but just a couple hours a day. And then our 5-year-old started kindergarten this year, and he really, really likes it. And he goes to school about 15 minutes from here. And then our 3rd grader, who's 8, he started a school this year too. So they're all in new places. They all like them very much. It's a relatively short drive, but it's interesting how the different kids react to this life because our 8-year-old is a bit of an introvert. He's more like his mom, maybe.
Right.
Our 5-year-old, everybody says he's more like me. He's a bit of an extrovert, so he really enjoys the attention.
Right.
And our 8-year-old could really do without the attention.
Right.
And it's funny, just kids, as much as you try to imagine that you can kind of shape them and form them, and of course you can in some ways, at some element their personality is very innate.
Yes.
And you sort of see that. And it's one of the cool things about having kids is, you could have seen some of these traits in the 8-year-old when he was 12 months old.
Yes.
Right. But it's kind of amazing. Anyway,
and
it's
they're
a very
all
nice
very
place.
different.
They're all very, very different. Yeah.
And you mentioned your dog, Atlas, a German Shepherd.
Yes.
Beautiful dog.
Thank you.
Very well behaved.
Very good boy.
Is he likely to bite any Secret Service agents?
Well, it's funny. No, certainly not. And it has become a thing. The Secret Services, they're very good and they're very professional. So they never dish on anybody that they've protected. But many Secret Service agents have told us, we're so grateful you have a dog who doesn't bite us, in particular a German Shepherd.
Yeah.
And it's funny, you could see, especially early on, they would sort of react very strongly.
PTSD.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
because they're only really, no, I mean, it was a serious problem, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it was Commander or whoever else, whatever.
Major and Commander.
Yeah. I guess we're pretty aggressive. Atlas is a very friendly dog. I think in part just because of the way that he grew up. So we got Atlas when he was 8 or 9 weeks old. At that time, our kids were, 2, 4, and 7 or something like that. So his entire life, he's basically been handled by kids. And I think it's just made him very social, and he's very friendly.
I mean, a German Shepherd is a particular type of dog, isn't it? I mean, they can be lethal weapons.
They can be, though. You can tell. I mean, if a stranger comes to the door, which usually isn't a real stranger, obviously, because you have to get through the Secret Service detail. Yeah. But, if somebody he's not expecting to show up, he'll bark and he'll definitely, he'll be defensive. but he's also incredibly protective of the kids. The kids can crawl all over him.
Right.
He never shows any aggression. It's really like, it's amazing. He definitely has this category of like in the circle and out of the circle. And if you're in the circle, he's super friendly to you. If you're out of the circle, maybe he's not.
Yes.
But pretty much everybody here is in the circle, right? Because he gets used to them and he knows who they are.
He was pretty polite to us.
He's very polite. Also, if I'm here, like if me or Usha are around, he's always very friendly. He sort of understands. All right, if mom or dad are around, he can kind of let his guard down.
Highly intelligent.
I will say that the one thing is like, because we have people who work here and we have people who help us with all manner of keeping the house up. If he's here with like a babysitter and it's just him and the kids, and a stranger somebody he doesn't know walks up, he will definitely bark his head off.
That's his job.
That's right. But he's not a biter. At least so far, he's not a biter.
I mean, the whole thing about Joe Biden, not to dwell on him, but, to choose a German Shepherd, you have to put a lot of effort into them, and they're very intelligent dogs. And he obviously hadn't done that. And you've been accused of having a renter dog for the image. But I feel like that's what Joe Biden did, because he didn't control those dogs.
No. And we were, the first 6 months or so really matter, right? And so we got Atlas. I mean, in hindsight, of course, I didn't know that our lives would change. We got Atlas in January of 2024. And so, of course, I got the nod in July of 2024. But really for those 6 months, I mean, I kind of obsessively trained him. Like you could see this, like he sits on command, he stays on command. He has this command place, which is basically if I snap my finger and point, he will run to that place and lay down.
You don't have to zap him.
No.
Hassan.
Not like Hassan Piker. No.
Wasn't that disgusting?
No electrocution of dogs here.
How disgusting is that? What does that tell you about a person?
Well, I think it tells you that they're not, that they're bad people.
Yes.
If you can actually cause suffering to an innocent animal, you're probably the kind of person who doesn't worry about suffering in people as well. Yeah. And that's been my experience. If you mistreat dogs, that's almost 100% sign that you're going to be a really terrible person. So it's one of the ways, we really sort of test people is if Atlas responds well to them, if they like Atlas, we know they're good people. But you can tell if somebody's really mean to animals, it's like the Jeffrey Dahmer thing. Yeah. Like every serial killer ever has actually been really bad to animals. That's sort of how they started. I remember like the Freddy Krueger movies were really big when I was a kid. Well, how did Freddy Krueger got to start? Like one of the things they show is young Freddy Krueger torturing animals. Yeah. I feel like we just sort of instinctively understand.
And dogs know.
Yeah, absolutely they do. If you're not taking care of God's creatures, then you're certainly going to be, I think, a pretty bad person otherwise too.
How did Atlas react to President Trump when he came for dinner a couple of weeks ago?
We kept Atlas upstairs. So the thing about Atlas is he's a very sweet dog, but he's also very jumpy because he's still a puppy. He's not even 2 years old. Well, no, he turns 2 years old because he turned 1 on election day.
Right.
Yeah. Which again, people accused us of like, oh, you just got a dog that happened to have a first birthday on election day. But he'll turn 2 in November. And he's very sweet, but if a new person comes and that person again is like in the circle, then he will jump all over that person. Yeah. I didn't want that to happen to the president in the first place. So we kept him upstairs with the kids.
And now you just came back from a trip to Jerusalem and you posted a video of yourself at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Yeah. And incredible experience. And you were there, you touched the tomb or the slab that Jesus Christ was placed on after his crucifixion. Yes. What was that like for you as a Catholic, as a converted Catholic?
Yeah, so it was probably the single most amazing experience of my life. Really? And of course, you're surrounded by all these security and, you walk in and what's really cool about this, I think it's like a good symbol of Christian unity, is that you have the Greek patriarch and you have the Armenian patriarch, and then you have, a representative of the Catholic Church, because those three churches all have this like co-ownership of this one church. And so that was really cool. And I'd been there before, but for maybe 15 minutes. I was there, when it was actually before I was even a senator. Right. I just wanted to see it.
As a tourist.
As a tourist, as a Christian. But, it's like there are a million people around and I didn't really know what I was looking for. And there's what's called the stone of anointing, which is in the Gospels, Jesus Christ is laid down after he's crucified, after he's killed, but before he's placed in the tomb, where he ultimately rises from the dead. So I knew what that was, but I hadn't actually.
That was what you were placing.
That was what I was placing my hand
Wow.
on. But okay, here's the thing that I just had no idea, because I was a tourist and I was, I had 15 minutes in between meetings, and I was like, I got to see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Yeah.
So there is a little side chapel where you have to kind of go up steps to it. And if you ever, you read the Gospels, it talks about Golgotha. Well, there's like, or Calvary, it's right there. And there's actually
where the cross was.
Right. And I'd never seen that, and I'd never been in there. And I'm not a big crier, but there's this weird thing. And I joked with the Greek patriarch, who's such a sweet man. He kept on being worried that I would bump my head. And I was like, man, you keep on worrying that I'm going to bump my head. You should join the Secret Service here, because you're protecting me more than anybody in this beautiful church. But so you kneel down, and it's a very short area, so you kind of have to almost crawl underneath. Oh. But then you can actually place your hand where the understanding of like where the cross would have been placed on Golgotha, and I started crying. There was just something, I was like completely overcome with emotion. And I didn't expect that. You never know what to expect. But there was this moment of just complete silence. The cameras, you're always surrounded by cameras. I don't think there were cameras, or maybe we had one photographer who was in there. But I just had this moment of feeling completely alone, and the emotion of the place came over me, and it was just incredible. And I got similarly emotional when I touched, it's the slab that is placed over the tomb.
Right.
And I learned things. I mean, just the history and the archaeology of this place is amazing, because, one of the questions is like, is this really the place where Jesus Christ was crucified? And so I guess there were people who said, well, the place where Christ was crucified would have had, just because of where it was in Jerusalem, would have had, grape and olive vine or grapevines and olive trees. And so they did an excavation like 10 years ago, and they found a bunch of historical grape and olive roots.
Right.
And so just the more that we've learned about it, the more that it kind of confirms this is actually the place where Jesus Christ was crucified and rose from the dead. And to just be there, it was unbelievable. And then to talk to the people who it's their job to take care of this place.
Yeah.
And the guy he's the custos is his actual title, but he's a Franciscan monk who is the kind of the Catholic representative in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And he runs the monastery that's there. And he's an Italian guy, but he was just kind of explaining to me what it meant to him. And it was unbelievable. And then I not to belabor this point too much, but then the Franciscans, and there were a couple of American priests who work in the Holy Land, and they did a private mass for us.
Oh, wow.
And that was
that church.
There in that church.
Wow. Amazing.
And I actually, knowing I was going to go there, there's this, it's called the CMCC. It's the command center effectively of the president's peace mission in the Holy Land. And I invited all the Americans who were there. I said, they're going to do a private mass for us. Just come up. And I didn't know if anybody would accept the invitation, but it was actually a very full mass in this little chapel where this Franciscan monk did an incredible church service for us. And he said something at the very end. Again, I got so emotional so many times when I was there, but he just, during his homily, he said something very sweet to me and to Usha. And you feel the power of that place. And if you believe as I believe, you think that the greatest miracle in human history happened right at that very spot. It was unbelievable.
Wow. And I mean, as a new Catholic, I guess, since 2019, you've met 2 popes already.
I know, it's crazy.
I mean, Pope Francis, and then he keeled over a couple of days after he met you.
Poor Pope Francis. Yeah. No, it's when I met Pope Francis, he was very frail, but I didn't realize he was that sick.
No. And
we had, whenever you go and you do these diplomatic missions, and there's always some element of protocol and formality to it. But I remember I talked to the people who were sort of, Pope Francis's team. And I told my team, I was like, look, I understand he's got some health problems. Like, we don't need to see Pope Francis. But they came back to us on the morning of Easter Sunday and said the Pope is going to do the mass. He's going to do a public appearance. And then I was like, great, absolutely. Wow. And so we went over there sort of at the last minute, probably spent 10 minutes with him. I mean, again, he was very frail. We actually still, and I could show this to you. I have one of my guys over here. Will, if you want to go to the pantry, there is like a chocolate egg. The Pope gave 3 of those to my kids.
Oh, right.
And we, they're like chocolate eggs, and we ate 2 of them, but we've saved this one because it was just very special. And of course, he passed away not even 24 hours later. He did his Easter church service with the pilgrims in Vatican Square. And then he died. And, I obviously didn't know him well. I thought that he had this really good heart, this focus on the poor, this focus on the downtrodden. And I try to remember that. And I try to follow that example.
Rather than the open borders. Which, just coming back to Joe Biden, because, Joe Biden, everyone talked about as a devout Catholic, cradle to grave, born Catholic, Irish Catholic, and as I am. But he was very pro-abortion when it was convenient to him. And I wondered, and I wonder if you got any sense of this, that whether his sort of open borders philosophy in his presidency was born of a sort of a quid pro quo with the Pope. He said he always talked to the Pope on the phone, and that he got a leave pass for being pro-abortion, which he had to do to become president for the Democrats. But as a quid pro quo, he opened the borders to, which is what Pope Francis wanted everyone to do.
Yeah, quid pro quo, I don't know. I would certainly hope that the Pope would never do something like that, because Biden was particularly egregious on the abortion issue. I mean, I was growing up, Democrats would say, we want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. Biden was like the most extreme possible on the abortion issue. I mean, it was taxpayer-funded abortion up to the moment of birth, absolutely no limits.
And he espoused that. It wasn't like other people were putting that into his mouth.
That was what he actually said and appeared to have actually believed. And that's so fundamentally inconsistent with Catholic teaching that I really do think that, and I will say, to their great credit, a lot of the American bishops did push back very firmly against the radical pro-abortion policy of the Biden administration during that time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, the Vatican, especially under Pope Francis, had a particular line on immigration. And if I was, I try to interpret this stuff charitably because, partially because I'm a new Catholic, but partially just because I try to sort of stay in my lane. I'm the vice president of the United States, and, the Pope is the Pope. What I try to interpret charitably is I think the Catholic Church recognizes we have to have border control. We have to have the ability to control the borders of our own country. That's very clearly written in Catholic teaching, is that nations are allowed sovereignty. They're allowed to control their own borders. However, it's always useful to remind ourselves that a lot of the people who have come into our country, they're struggling in some way. They're human beings.
Yes.
And even though we have to engage in immigration enforcement, I try to remind myself, consistent with church teaching, that yes, doesn't mean we can let these people stay in our country, but I do have a responsibility to try to remember their humanity. And that's sort of my charitable interpretation is, yes, you can have your border policy. Yes, you can enforce your borders. You also have to try to remind that all 8 billion people who are alive on this planet are God's creatures. We have to owe them a certain respect and a certain dignity. Doesn't mean we should let them illegally immigrate into our country.
Not really
and
their fault.
That's how I balance.
I mean, not really their fault if Joe Biden's laid out the welcome mat.
Well, yeah, and there are some particularly troubling. Again, I'm not saying this means we should let them stay in our country, because I very firmly believe that we shouldn't. Let me take like one example of this that's really hard, that actually a priest friend of mine raised with me. He does a lot of ministry for both law enforcement officers, but also criminals. And so he sort of sees this from both sides. And he said, here's an example of a person. And again, not saying this person should stay in our country, but let's say Joe Biden waved the magic asylum wand or waved the parole wand. So the president of the United States let you come into this country. And I'm not angry at that person who came into our country. I'm mad at Joe Biden.
Yes.
And I'm mad at the Democratic Party for waving that person into our country in the first place, which of course encouraged other people to come into the country illegally. Yeah. Now, I would say, and this is something that I really wish that all Christians took more seriously, is that when we have to show dignity to people, whether they're in our country legally or illegally. But when you encourage illegal immigration at the scale that Joe Biden did, you empower the cartels, you empower these people who are raping and murdering and selling 12-year-old girls into sex slavery.
Or C-sections on little girls, that Diablo woman.
Exactly.
Evil.
Really, really evil stuff. And so the Biden border crisis, I think it's too easy to say, well, there's a balance between immigration enforcement and treating people like humans. Of course, that's true. However, sometimes the open border encouraged the very worst and most violent criminals. It encouraged people to prey on innocent young girls. If we're going to talk about the human dignity of the migrant, we've got to talk about that too. And in some ways, the best thing that we can do to protect the human dignity of the migrant, but certainly of the American citizens that I have a certain responsibility to protect, is to stop the border crisis, which thanks to President Trump's leadership, that's exactly what we've done.
Why do you think Joe Biden and the Democrats, I mean, I've got that theory about Joe Biden sort of trying to save his soul, but why do you think the Democrats did this? Was it really just to juice up the census or get more voters?
I think it's complicated. I try to understand everybody's perspective, even when I disagree with them strongly. I think the most obvious thing is that it completely distorts the democratic process in this country. When you let in millions upon millions of people, some of them will eventually get the ability to vote. It certainly distorts the congressional maps. And so I do think that they were using immigration to seize control illegitimately of the institutions of this country. Some of them would say that openly, by the way. They would actually say, we want these new people to come in because we can't win the votes of the people who are already here, so we're going to import new voters to replace them. I think it's really a disgusting way to think about immigration, but some of them said that. Now, if I'm being a little bit more charitable, I think that was certainly going on. I also think that there was this distorted humanitarian thing going on where any enforcement, any law enforcement period, these people have convinced themselves is somehow unchristian or immoral. I think that's the wrong attitude to take, because when you don't enforce the law against the people who violate the law, you empower the sex traffickers, you empower the murderers, and you empower the drug dealers. And so,
and you bankrupt Medicare.
And you bankrupt, absolutely, you bankrupt the country. And so I think some people were motivated by a distorted humanitarian impulse. I think a lot of people just wanted to import voters. But regardless of the answer, I think the only thing that is both consistent from a humanitarian perspective, that is actually consistent with the duty that we owe to the American people, and also is just good for the country, is to do what President Trump has done, which is close the border and to ensure that anybody who comes into the country has to come through the legal pathway that we've agreed on. There's another thing that's going on, Miranda, that I think Democrats really underappreciated how bad it was for the country. Okay. Our immigration policy is set, in theory, by democratic policy. You vote for congressmen and women. They enact the immigration policy. The President of the United States enforces that immigration policy. When you have millions upon millions of people coming into this country illegally, it violates the fundamental social contract that the American people get to make our immigration law, not a lawless American president completely disregarding that law. And that's what happened, is a lot of Americans looked at our border and said, wait a second, they're actually violating the law to let people come in, which drives up the cost of housing, actually has a lot of people competing for Americans, or competing against Americans for American jobs. And you do it in this fundamentally illegitimate way, because if Joe Biden stood before the American people and said, I'd like to let 5 million low-wage immigrants into this country every single year, the American people would say no. But he didn't ask the American people. He just did it without asking permission. I think that's illegal, but I also think it delegitimizes the entire immigration system in this country.
But remember, in the Democratic primaries, when all the candidates, including Joe Biden, were standing up on stage, and they all were asked a question about, would you give illegal migrants free health care? And they all put their hand up and said, of course. Like it's just an article of faith in the Democratic Party.
It's completely an article of faith. And think about how bizarre that is, right? These programs exist as part of the social contract for United States citizens. You pay into this system, and if you need it, if you get down on your luck or you get to the point where you can't afford certain benefits, then you are able to take out of this system. That's the exchange that we have with our fellow citizens, in particular with our old age health insurance program. It is that you pay into the system your entire life, and when you get to the point where you're retired, you get access to high quality health care, right? That's the whole idea. If you're going to give Medicaid and Medicare benefits to illegal aliens, you completely destroy that system. You bankrupt it, and you make it so that Americans themselves are not able to access that system. I saw a chart, it was maybe yesterday or the day before, Miranda, it asked, what share of illegal alien households compared to native-born American households are accessing welfare? And the answer was native-born American households, it's something like 30%. For illegal alien households, it's 60%. Now, what Democrats and their allies in the media will say, no. That's not how it works, because it says in the law that illegal aliens are not allowed to access welfare benefits. But there are innumerable exceptions to this rule. For example, the state of California under Gavin Newsom gives Medicaid benefits to illegal aliens. The housing benefits, while they're not supposed to go to illegal aliens, there's a lot of fraud. And then on top of the fraud, you have, if an illegal alien comes in and has a baby, then that baby can then access housing benefits through the parents, even though the parents are illegal aliens themselves. So there are all of these ways in which people are able to game the system. And it's why 60% of illegal alien households are benefiting from our welfare programs. That's how you bankrupt this country and destroy those programs for the people who actually need it.
And that's how they can afford to take slave labor wages.
Exactly.
Because they're subsidized. The taxpayers subsidizing.
This is such an important point, Miranda, and it's something people don't appreciate. And by the way, they're willing to accept a standard of living that most Americans won't accept and shouldn't have to accept. And this was, if you remember, the big controversy about all of the migrants who came into Haiti. 20,000 immigrants, Haitian migrants, in a town of 40,000 people. So you blink your eyes in Springfield, Ohio, and you wake up and literally a third of the population of your town is now Haitian immigrants.
And eating cats and dogs.
Now, Biden paroled those immigrants. And what did that mean? Those immigrants were now able, even if they didn't have kids, all of them were able to access housing benefits. So I would talk to constituents in Springfield, Ohio. This is when I was still a senator. This was before I was the vice presidential nominee. And here's the situation they would describe to me that happened in Springfield, Ohio. So you're a landlord and you're renting, let's say, a 3-bedroom house to a family of 4, family of 5. Okay. They're paying, let's say, $1,000 a month a couple of years ago in Springfield, Ohio to rent that house. Now, all of a sudden, 4 families of Haitian migrants come in, each of them getting $1,000 per family, and they're willing to put 20 people into a 3-bedroom house. So what does that do? That prices all of the American citizens out of those houses. Right. That drives up the rents for everybody, because now you have a 3-bedroom house that you can rent for $4,000 a month or $3,000 a month instead of $1,000 a month. That completely destroys the ability of Americans to live the American dream. And that's what those open borders did.
And creates division and hatred.
And of course it does. But how could it not create division? I mean, let's say you're living in a house and your neighbors move out. We can hear Atlas shaking outside. He must have just come in from outside. But you have, let's say, a family of 5 that you've known for 5 years, 10 years, moves out of a house, is actually evicted from the house because there are people who are going to pay more for rent. And then what happens is 20 people move into a 3-bedroom house, 20 people from a totally different culture, totally different ways of interacting. Again, we can respect their dignity while also being angry at the Biden administration for letting that situation happen and recognizing that their next door neighbors are going to say, well, wait a second, what is going on here? I don't know these people. They don't speak the same language that I do. And because there are 20 in the house next door, it's a little bit rowdier than it was when there was just a family of 4, a family of 5. It is totally reasonable and acceptable for American citizens to look at their next door neighbors and say, I want to live next to people who I have something in common with. I don't want to live next to 4 families of strangers. And the fact that we had an immigration system that actually promoted that division is a real disgrace of the Biden administration.
And are you going to be able to remove all of those illegal migrants that came in during the Biden administration?
We're trying to remove as many as we possibly can. So I haven't seen the numbers in the past couple of weeks, but as of about a month ago, the net number of migrants in our country had gone down by about 2 million. And that was a combination of deportations and what we call self-deportations, because we're kind of putting it out there and saying, look, you are in the country illegally. We invite you, and in some ways we'll even incentivize you to go back home and to actually, if you want to come to the United States, to come through legal channels and not to come into the country illegally. So we've got 2 million fewer than there were at the start of the term. That's about 8 months in. And again, that's a great credit to the president and the entire team. Yeah. But there's a lot to go. And we're just going to keep on working at it. Yeah. And we're going to try to chip away at that as much as possible. I remember during the campaign, Miranda, people would ask me, how do you possibly deport 10 million people? Yeah. How do you possibly deport 18 million people? And I say the same way that you eat a very big sandwich, you do it a bite at a time. And right now we've taken about 2 million out of the country. We're going to keep on working at it. It's going to be much, much higher by the end of the president's administration. I think that how much higher is just a function of how much we put the pedal to the metal. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do everything that we possibly can to actually correct the problem of the Biden border invasion.
Now, President Trump's been saying quite often about the dream ticket that he's got now for his succession, which is you and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio.
He said that privately at dinner a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, I wonder how long it's going to take for him to say it publicly.
He's been saying it ever since. So how do you feel about that? And have you talked to the Secretary Rubio about it?
I've joked with the secretary about it. So the president first raised this with me probably 6 months or so ago,
right?
During just one of our private lunches that we try to get lunch every couple of weeks just to catch up on what's going on and talk about things. He mentioned it probably 6 months or so ago, and I mentioned to the secretary in jest, but it feels so premature because we're still so early. And what I always say to people is, if we take care of business, the politics will take care of itself. And we're 9 months into this thing. We've done a lot of good. There's a lot more work to do because, look, the thing that I most worry about is that Biden left us a terrible affordability crisis. We've got to make life more affordable for American citizens. Again, we've chipped away at that problem, but there's a lot more work to do there. So my attitude is, the American people elected me to be vice president. I'm going to work as hard as I can to make the president successful over the next 3 years and 3 months. And if we get to a point where something else is in the offer, let's handle it then. But let's at least get through the next couple of years and do good work for the American people before we talk about politics.
The president doesn't mention who will be running for president and who vice president. Now, everyone assumes it would be you, but Marco Rubio is 13 years older. He's run for president before. Would there be any tension there?
First of all, no, there's not going to be any tension. Marco is my best friend in the administration. He and I work a lot together.
Right.
And we really do, I think, a lot of the good work that we've been able to do as an administration is because we're all able to work together. And again, this is why I say worrying too much about the politics actually, I think, makes you worse at the job that you have. I never want to wake up. And so far, I've never woken up and thought to myself, how do I make myself president of the United States? What I wake up and think to myself is, how do I do a good job as vice president? And I think Marco Rubio asks himself, how do I do a good job as Secretary of State? And that should be the question that each of us keeps on asking ourselves.
So what does a vice president actually do? Because we know Kamala Harris did nothing. Joe Biden traveled around the world.
Sometimes I'm envious of Kamala Harris.
Joe Biden grifted, we know. So, you seem to have a lot of different hats that you wear. So there's a lot of foreign policy.
Yeah, part of it is the job is very dependent on the president of the United States, right? And so if you have the trust of the president and he actually gives you a lot to do, then there's a whole lot to do. And that's how I found the job so far, is that there's nothing where I've wanted to get involved in where the president has said no. And a lot of times, if there's something important the president cares about, he'll call me, or if I'm in the room, he'll say, JD, you take care of this. You make sure that this gets done. And that's how I found myself in Jerusalem about a week ago, is the president wanted me to go and check on the progress of what was happening. Look, it's crazy. Peace in the Middle East. The president of the United States achieved peace in the Middle East. He got the 20 hostages home, and he wanted me to go and make sure things were going well, and they were.
But then in the Knesset, they had that, which I think you took personally. They had that vote, like a stunt, to say, let's go and colonize the West Bank.
Yeah, part of the reason I called it a stunt is because the Israeli government itself didn't want the vote to happen. It was actually the opposition to the Israeli government. It would be the equivalent of the Democrats trying to do something to the president to embarrass him. But, I took offense to it because it's like, why embarrass your political opponents while the vice president of the United States is in your country. It just seemed ridiculous to me. But to answer your question, I mean, I think the reason why I've been able to do a lot is because the president trusts me and he's empowered me with a lot of responsibilities. And it's made the job a lot of fun. I mean, as much as I joke about, I kind of wish that I could sleep until, 1 o'clock, take a couple of phone calls and then, hit the bottle after that, which I think was the Kamala Harris approach to being vice president. It would be really boring. And we have a lot of fun. We do a lot of good work because the president trusts me. So
let's talk about Ukraine. There was the famous Oval Office meeting in which you got Zelensky to blow his top. Was that sort of strategized with you and the president? I mean, he knows your views.
Not at all. No.
So take us back to that moment. Like, did you think Zelensky was going to blow up the way he did?
No.
Because he was so rude.
Well, that was what bothered me about it. And again, I'll say this: that was 6 months ago. Yeah. We have turned over a new leaf. We're trying to have.
He's turned over a new leaf.
We're trying to have exactly.
He's wearing suits.
Yes, he is. We're trying to have productive relationships with both the Ukrainians and the Russians because we want to end this conflict. And I think the president has a very good working relationship. So do I with all the parties involved. But I mean, if you go back to that moment, I was getting frustrated because I perceived some rudeness. And I actually, if you remember the way it happened, it's been a little while, so I don't remember the exact thing, but you can roll the tape. It's probably the most famous thing I've ever done or maybe ever will do.
I've watched it probably 10 times.
But there was a reporter who asked a question, and I think the president answered it, and then I answered it too. And then Zelensky didn't like my answer, and that's kind of what started the tit for tat. And then, of course, it just completely went off the rails after that. And look, I think the takeaway from that for me, but also I think for any foreign leader who comes to the Oval Office in particular, like when you're meeting, a couple hours ago, the president was sitting down with the prime minister of Japan. It's one thing when the president goes to the prime minister of Japan. It's another thing when the prime minister of Japan comes to the Oval Office, right? And you try to basically respect the rules of the house that you're in. And if you come to the Oval Office, you come to the People's White House in the United States of America, there's an expectation that you're going to show the head of state, the president of the United States, a little bit of respect. If you're going to disagree, which of course everybody should feel free to disagree, it's why we have these conversations, is to flesh out disagreements and try to identify common interest. You can do it in a particularly productive way, or you can do it in an unproductive way.
Do you think it served its purpose, though, because it actually, as you say, President Zelensky has behaved in a much more respectful manner since? And was that a necessary kind of reset from the Joe Biden times, which was whatever Ukraine wants, we just give it to them?
I think so. I actually think airing everything out, doing it in public, actually articulating where there were disagreements and where there were common interests actually was pretty productive. And I do think that now the relationship is much more productive. And one of the things that we've tried to do, I mean, in particular, one of the things the president has tried to do is every time he talks to the Russians or the Ukrainians, it is not slogans, it's not cliches, it's what do you actually think about this? Where are the areas of disagreement? And as frustrating as it has been, and the president has said this repeatedly, he thought this was going to be the easiest war to get wrapped up. It's actually been the hardest war to get wrapped up. The reason that we've made progress is because the president has been laser focused on what is it that you actually think. And if you compare that to when Zelensky would come to town during the Biden administration and everybody would wave the flag and everybody would talk about how great everything was, there was not any real diplomacy that happened. And under President Trump's leadership, it's been much different.
Are you surprised that the Russians are being so intransigent? I mean, they were given, the opportunity. I think what President Trump is now saying is just freeze the lines and have a ceasefire. But they're refusing to do that. And President Trump's under a lot of pressure to give Ukraine Tomahawks. He's sort of contemplated it. He doesn't like the idea that that's taking us a step forward towards, he said, World War III.
Sure.
So where are we at?
Well, one, you understand that the president asks himself the question, what is in America's best interest? And his view is America getting more involved in the conflict is not in our interest. America bringing the conflict to a close is in our interest. And so everything that he's done, from the sanctions that he's done on Russian oil companies to the conversations he's had with Zelensky to actually shifting more of the burden to the Europeans. And I think one of the things that I was frustrated with under the Biden administration, I think a lot of Americans, even Americans who are very pro-supporting Ukraine, sort of threw up their hands and said, why aren't the Europeans doing more? The President of the United States has shifted a lot of that burden onto the Europeans, which I think most Americans think is a really good idea. But it's all motivated by the question of what is in America's best interest. And I think the president continues to be laser focused on bringing the conflict to a close. That's what he thinks is in our interest. That's what he's going to keep on working on.
So sanctions is part of it.
And sometimes that's going to mean carrots and sometimes that's going to mean sticks. And we're just going to have to keep working at it. And there's a give and take to this. As we've talked about, Miranda, before, sometimes it feels like we're making progress with the Russians. And sometimes it feels like we're making progress with the Ukrainians. And sometimes it feels like we're making progress with one or the other, but neither. And that's why you see the president constantly pushing, exercising American leverage, and we're just going to keep on working at it. I can't say where exactly it's going to go, but it's going to end eventually.
So you can't predict. What would be your prediction? Like, how do you think it will end? Will it end just frozen in place? Will they just keep fighting?
It's so hard to say, Miranda. And every time that I've made a prediction privately, something has happened a month later. I mean, there was a part where, if you asked me 6 months or so ago, I would have said they're never going to stop fighting. This is going to be like Russia's Vietnam. They're going to be constantly. 15 years later, they're still going to be fighting. If you ask me, a month ago, I would have said we're making incredible progress. So it's hard to venture a prediction, but I do think that we have reached the point of diminishing returns for both sides. The amount of territory the Russians are gaining is so small, and they're losing a lot of people in the process. The Ukrainians, their electricity infrastructure and they're suffering from a lot of problems. Of course, a lot of war dead themselves. We really do believe we reached the point where it's in both Russia and Ukraine's interest to stop fighting. But look, the president can only open the door. He can't actually force either side to walk through it.
When it came to, I guess what I'm trying to ask you now is about your relationship with Donald Trump. And is there any time that you disagree with him? Like Iran, the bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities would be one that I think there were a lot of people who were in the sort of MAGA, people like Tucker Carlson were very antagonistic to that because they saw it as dragging us into Israel's war or into World War III.
Sure.
What was your view going into that? And did you try and advise the president not to bomb?
Well, let me say two things. First of all, privately, of course you have disagreements, but I think it's really important for the president to be able to rely on my advice and for me to support his agenda once he's made a decision. That's kind of my attitude is I have two real responsibilities here. On the one hand, I've got to give the president honest counsel. He expects it from me. I owe it to him. But the president's going to make a decision. And when the president makes a decision, he's in charge of the government. And my attitude is I salute, I say, aye, aye, sir, and I go and execute. And both of those things really matter. Now, with the Iran thing in particular, because it's past and I think it's easy to talk about it. I think that there was a real fear from some people that any action towards Iran would lead to some sort of escalation spiral that would lead us having ground troops in Iran. And,
were you worried about that?
No, I wasn't worried about that because I saw the decisions the president was actually making. I can understand if you're on the outside looking in, you don't understand what the president's actually saying. You don't want to understand what the president actually thinks.
A surgical strike.
But he wanted to eliminate, particularly the Fordo nuclear facility that only we had the ability to do. He wanted to do it while Iran's air defenses were down, because that's a risky mission, even with B-2s, if they have robust air defenses. And he saw an opportunity and he went to the Iranians and he said, dismantle this facility peacefully. They said no. And he said, okay, we're going to do it non-peacefully. And because I knew that he was surgically focused on that particular issue and he was not interested in putting 100,000 troops in Iran, I felt quite confident that we could do the president's mission, that we could accomplish America's goals. And I think it was a very good thing for the United States of America, but we would not get dragged into this protracted Middle Eastern conflict. Now, to be clear, I worry about that all the time. I worry about us getting drawn into these protracted conflicts.
You were in Iraq.
But I was in Iraq. But I was not worried about it there because I saw the decision-making process the president was engaged in. Of course, I offered my counsel as it was necessary, but a lot of the criticisms levied against the president in the heat of the moment, I remember it. I remember that very well. I don't think that they were fully aware of how the president himself was thinking about it. And again, that's politics, right? You're not going to have access to every classified piece of information when you're a journalist seeing this from the outside in. From the inside, I think the president handled that perfectly, and it was very good for the country.
And there's a streak of isolationism in MAGA, and that's criticized a lot by, I guess, the neocon section of the Republican Party and the Democrat Party that are aligned. Do you see yourself as an isolationist?
No, not at all. I don't think the president's an isolationist. And I don't think that most people in MAGA are isolationists. What I do think that they are is that they are very skeptical of getting involved in foreign conflicts, because for pretty much my entire life, a lot of times we get involved in a foreign conflict and it's a total disaster. I mean, you go back to the 2016 primaries, and who was the one guy on stage saying it was a disaster for us to be involved in Iraq? That was Donald Trump. Not because Donald Trump's an isolationist, not because he would never use American military power, as we've seen in the administration, clearly he will, but because I think he recognizes that, and I've heard them say this so many times, when you go to war, you never know what's going to happen. He talks about this with Putin. Putin thought that was going to be a 1-week war, easy, over. He accomplished his objectives. Now, 4 years later, he's losing thousands upon thousands of Russian soldiers every single month. The president is very skeptical of war because he knows that it's unpredictable. But being skeptical of war, I think, is the exact right approach. Saying that you can never use military force, I think that's the wrong approach. It takes it too far. You've got to kind of be in the middle somewhere. And I think that's where the president's foreign policy, he's both skeptical of foreign entanglements, but he's not afraid to use American military power when he has to. And again, I'm biased. I'm the vice president of the United States. I think that's exactly where we should be.
I wanted to ask you about Hillbilly Elegy, your best-selling autobiography, and I guess the thing that put you on the map. At the time, it was mid-2016 when it came out, and you were called yourself a heavy never Trumper, very negative. You've addressed this, but so I don't want to dwell on that, but is there something about Donald Trump since you've been his vice president that surprises you, that he is such a unique person?
Unbelievably. People have no idea.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what makes him tick?
Well, it's interesting. Yes, since becoming vice president, obviously, I knew him quite well. I mean, he endorsed me in my 2022 Senate race. I had gotten to know him quite well, and I became one of his big surrogates in 2023 and 2024. I think I was the first senator actually to endorse him back in the primary race in 2022. Maybe it was early 23.
Was that self-interest, or did you see something in him?
No, I really thought that he had shown an ability to stand up to the worst forces in American society with more courage and more grit than anybody else. That, and I also, actually, it's funny, his foreign policy, I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal endorsing him because I was like, this is a guy who has a robust view of what American military power can accomplish, but also kept us out of any stupid foreign conflicts. And that really mattered. Yeah. That really mattered for me. What have I learned about him since becoming vice president? Let me say a few things. First of all, he has a very good heart. And, when he came, he and the first lady came for dinner a couple of weeks ago. The kids were upstairs with a babysitter, but they really wanted to see the president and the first lady. So we brought him down, and you never know what to expect. An 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, like, kids misbehave. And they were pretty well behaved, but they were kids, right? They were jumping around. They were rambunctious. They were saying totally weird shit. And he was just so good with them. Yeah. And he is, I think, has a natural grandfatherly way, especially with kids. He really loves kids, and they really loved him in return. And it's interesting because he's gotten to know our kids a lot. They're always in the White House, and I've never once felt like he's impatient or he just wants them out of there. He always just has a really good heart about little kids. And I think that's something I didn't appreciate about him. He has a way about him. He has a way about him where people are naturally, I think, attracted to him. He has a magnetic personality, and kids in particular are very attracted to him. I think he has, a friend of mine once said that he has animal instincts. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, like a lion in the savannah you have to have almost a sixth sense about what's going on behind it. You have to be able to see things that you can't actually see with your eyes. And that is absolutely true about Donald Trump. He has unbelievable instincts. And sometimes, like I remember having this conversation with Susie Wiles where there was a particular issue and you had everybody trying to work the president. They were calling him, they were trying to influence him, they were trying to pressure him. And I was like, I got to get in there and talk to the president because I don't think he realizes these people are trying to work him. And Susie looks at me and she says, Mr. Vice President, you don't think that Donald Trump realizes that these people are trying to work him? And he just does. He automatically understands when somebody is trying to get one over on him. And that makes him such an effective leader because you can't be everywhere at once as president of the United States. But so long as you know who to trust and who not to trust, and so long as you have a way of navigating around the various pieces of counsel that you're getting, that's what makes him a great president, is that instinctive ability to know when somebody has the country's interest at heart or when they have some other interest at heart. I think that's an amazing thing. And the third thing that I'd say about him, I guess I'd heard it, but he really is like the hardest working, most energetic person. Marco sometimes jokes around with me because the president and I never traveled together, especially overseas, but really at all. We're never on an airplane together
for the security
reasons, for continuity of government reasons. And so everybody always jokes with me, when you go on one of these 23-hour international trips with Donald Trump, if you're lucky, he'll sleep 2 hours. Right. If you're unlucky, he'll be roaming around Air Force One, busting your chops because you've fallen asleep and oh, he's low energy. Look, he's already asleep and he's, been on the plane for 18 hours.
He wakes up the journalists for midnight gaggles.
He wakes up the journalists for midnight gaggles. There is just something about him. And I don't know if it's, he's president of the United States for 4 years this term, and he's just so focused on getting as much as possible done. But he really sleeps less and still has more energy than anybody that I know that's 40 years younger than he is. And that is, you hear people talk about it. You wonder how true it is. Trust me, I've seen it from the inside. He has unbelievable energy.
And I quickly wanted to ask you just about having children. You've described your childhood as pretty brutal.
Sure.
Your mother was a heroin addict. And so how do you those parenting skills, you must be you have to invent them yourself, I guess.
You invent them yourself. But I also think this is one of the things that both is motivating about, but also attracted me to my faith is there are, I think, very strong, developed over literally hundreds of years, Christian principles about how to be a dad, how to be a husband. And I try to follow that as much as possible. I try not to lose my temper when I'm punishing my kids. I try to do it from a place of reason and not from a place of, oh my God, I can't believe you just did that and I'm mad about it. I try to be, strict, but also loving. There are all of these things that you learn, I think, from being a Christian that's helpful. I pick a lot of it up from my wife because she grew up in a very, very conventional middle-class household. Her parents are great. They were very good to her and her sister. And so I think she has, and it's crazy, Miranda. I've actually, back before we were flying around in Air Force Two, people would stop my wife all the time at airports and say, you are so good with your kids. We actually would have I remember, I'll never forget this. We had a child psychologist walk up to my wife and say, this is how I counsel people to interact with their kids.
Right.
Because she's just very natural at it. And then some of it
you chose well.
Yeah, I did choose. I chose very well. I'm a very lucky man. But some of it you pick up on the fly. Some of it you try to, I had very good uncles who were very good father figures to me. My grandfather was very involved in my life. So there are definitely things that I pick up, but I also try to remind my kids, what was it we were watching? My son just read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And so we watched, the original Willy Wonka, right? The really good one.
Movie, yeah.
Great movie. And, he doesn't really understand Charlie's life. Think about it. He's 8 years old. He's never wanted for anything in his life. And we just, I paused it and tried to talk with my 8-year-old about it. Cause I'm like, buddy, but for the grace of God would be your life. And there are a lot of kids in this country, a lot of kids in the world in particular who struggle with having enough to eat. And that's one of the reasons why we care about what we do is we want to make sure that everybody has access to good shelter and nutritious food and a loving family. And that's one of the reasons why I care about the things that I do. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to be vice president. But like, I try to remind my kids as much as possible that there are kids out there who have very, very unlucky lives. And I think because I had a rougher childhood, I have a different perspective.
That bred resilience, though, didn't it?
It did.
Do you worry that your kids won't have that adversity that
I worry about
drove
that
you?
Oh, absolutely. I worry about that all the time. I mean, my kids have such a fortunate life. I mean, they have two parents who love them. Their parents are going to be together forever. Yeah. They're never going to have to worry about where their next meal came from. So in some ways that's what you want for your kids. Yes. But I do worry that lack of adversity will breed a lack of resilience. And so that's why we try to, talk about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I try to talk about how, there are things that happen in his life that were similar to Daddy's life. And we try to just sort of discuss that with our kids because, you can't force adversity on your children, but you can try to give them a different perspective. And that's what I try to do. But I worry about that all the time because Clarence Thomas made this point to me once. He's a great man, had a much rougher childhood than I did. He once told me that, he used to be resentful about his childhood. Yeah. And now he thinks it was his greatest blessing. Wow. Because it gave him a totally different perspective. And I feel the exact same way. I remember being in college and being resentful that, I had to work 3 jobs while some of my friends didn't.
You must have been.
Oh, absolutely. Resentful of my mom in particular. And now, and by the way, Mom's clean and sober for going on 11 years. Amazing. We've got a great relationship. Yeah. She was actually here this weekend hanging out with the kids. So Mom's doing great. I'm very proud of her. Yeah. But when that resentment turns into appreciation, I think it was one of the great gifts of my life. And there are ways in which I didn't have a conventional relationship with my dad growing up, but there are a lot of ways in which the way that I grew up gave me great perspective, and hopefully my kids can benefit from that.
One last question about UFOs. So I'm a mad UFO lunatic as well. Yeah. So, and you said, I think the Ruthless podcast that you were going to, in August, you were going to figure out what happened. So have you
was a little tongue in cheek. I have not figured it out yet. Right. I haven't had the time to figure it out yet.
But you've got access to all this.
I do. And I really want to sort of dig into it. Marco's actually very interested in this too. We talked about this talked about this back in our Senate days. So there's certainly an interest there. There's certainly an intrigue, but I haven't yet had the time to really dig in. Things have been so busy, but this is the crazy person inside of me. And there's, all of us put the tinfoil hat on from time to time. I was like, I can't allow myself to become so busy that I spend the next 3 years and I don't get to the bottom of this. So I will get to the bottom of this, but it's going to take me a little time.
Because Tulsi Gabbard says that she believes there are aliens. Do you believe that?
I don't, it's interesting. I wouldn't say that I do or don't believe it. I mean, I'm a big believer that there are things out there that we can't explain. And so if another person sees an alien, maybe I see an angel or a demon. So I'm a big believer that there are spiritual forces working on the physical world that a lot of us don't see and a lot of us don't understand and a lot of us don't appreciate. But, is it aliens or is it our guardian angel, or is it aliens, or is it a not so guardian force that doesn't care about us or in fact actively wishes us harm? I don't know the answer to that question. What I try to do is I try to say my prayers. I try to be as good of a person as I can be, and I try to do a good job. And hopefully that's all I need to do.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Vice President.
Good to see you.
Sorry to overstay the welcome.
Not at all.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on Podforce One. I'm Miranda Devine. Please give this podcast a like and a follow. It will help others to find these great conversations. We'll be back next week with more fantastic interviews.